The sky hung low and heavy, the color of grief itself. A damp chill permeated the air, clinging to the rows of white headstones in Arlington National Cemetery's Section 60, whispering tales of loss and sacrifice. Monica stood ramrod straight, her dress blues stark against the gray morning. For stars gleamed on her shoulders, reflecting the somber light like polished tears. Each star a testament to a life dedicated to service, a life now irrevocably shattered. Beneath the crisp uniform, her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a gilded cage. The rhythmic thud of the drums, the mournful wail of the bagpipes, it all seemed distant, muffled, as though heard from the bottom of a well. Her son, her Isaiah, lying beneath the freshly turned earth, just 22 years young. He'd worn a different uniform, fought a different battle, and paid the ultimate price. The weight of it pressed down on her, heavy and suffocating. The scent of damp earth and lilies mingled with the metallic tang of her own fear. Fear she'd never admit to, not even to herself. Until now. The limousine pulled to a stop, the quiet hiss of the brakes a stark contrast to the roaring silence in her ears. Her sister, Vivian, reached for her hand, a silent offering of comfort. Monica's fingers, cold and stiff, intertwined with Vivian's. The warmth of the contact was a fleeting spark in the vast emptiness within her. "I don't think I can do this," she whispered, the words barely audible above the mournful drone of the bagpipes. Her voice was a stranger's, thin and brittle. A lifetime of discipline, of steeling herself against unimaginable horrors, seemed to crumble under the weight of this very private, very personal agony. Beside her, Delroy Hunt, Isaiah's godfather and her comrade for more than 2 decades, squeezed her hand. "You've done harder, Monica," he murmured, his voice low and steady. He understood. He'd stood beside her through countless battles, seen the fire in her eyes, the unwavering resolve that made her a legend. But this was a different kind of war, one fought on the battlefield of the soul. Monica drew a shaky breath, the cold air stinging her lungs. She knew Delroy was right. She had faced down enemy fire, navigated treacherous political landscapes, made life-or-death decisions with unflinching clarity. Yet, standing here, before the grave of her only child, she felt utterly powerless. She forced herself to step out of the car, her movements stiff and robotic. Each footfall echoed in the silence, a slow march towards a reality she couldn't comprehend. The honor guards stood at attention, their faces stoic masks of grief and respect. The flag, draped over the casket, rippled gently in the breeze, a vibrant splash of color against the muted backdrop. Monica's gaze fixed on the flag, on the 13 stripes representing the original colonies, the 50 stars symbolizing the United States. Isaiah had believed in that unity, in the ideals that flag represented. He had died defending them. A wave of nausea washed over her, a physical manifestation of the bitter irony churning within her. As the chaplain began the eulogy, Monica's eyes scanned the crowd. Familiar faces blurred into a sea of somber expressions. Fellow officers, friends, family, all united in grief, in shared loss. And then she saw him, across the meticulously manicured lawn, standing slightly apart from the other mourners, a figure in blue. A police officer. He wasn't part of the detail assigned to the funeral. His posture was casual, almost nonchalant, his hand resting on the butt of his holstered weapon. Something about him, something about the way he watched her sent a chill down her spine. It was more than just suspicion. It was a primal instinct, honed over years of facing danger, that screamed a warning. Officer Brent Delaney shifted his weight, his gaze lingering on Monica. He hadn't expected a 4-star general to be black. Not here in Arlington. Not burying a kid in Section 60. His assumptions had been wrong. He'd been called in for a potential disturbance, a possible protest. They'd said family from out of town, which in his experience usually meant trouble. He squinted at the general, his mind struggling to reconcile the image of a grieving mother with the authority her uniform represented. His hand tightened on his holster, Monica felt a prickle of unease, a tightening in her chest. The officer's gaze felt intrusive, almost predatory. She tried to dismiss it, to attribute it to her heightened emotional state, but the feeling persisted. She subtly shifted her position, placing Delroy between herself and the officer. The chaplain's voice droned on, the words blurring together in a meaningless litany. Monica's focus narrowed, zeroing in on the officer. He hadn't moved, his eyes still fixed on her. She could feel the weight of his stare, a palpable pressure against her skin. Suddenly, the officer began to approach, his hand hovering near his weapon. The movement, though seemingly innocuous, sent a jolt of alarm through Monica. Her breath hitched in her throat. Her mind raced, trying to decipher his intent. Why was he coming towards her? What did he want? Delroy, sensing the shift in her demeanor, turned slightly, his eyes following her gaze. He saw the officer, saw the hand near the weapon, and felt a surge of protective anger. He stepped forward, placing himself squarely between Monica and the approaching officer. "Everything all right, General?" he asked, his voice low and calm, masking the tension coiling within him. Monica nodded, unable to speak past the lump forming in her throat. She felt a cold dread seep into her bones, a chilling premonition of something terrible about to happen. The officer stopped a few feet away, his eyes still locked on Monica. "General Triggs?" he asked, his tone laced with suspicion. Before Monica could respond, a young woman in uniform pushed through the crowd, her face a mask of urgency. "Lieutenant Serena Keogh, Arlington PD," she announced, addressing the officer. "What's going on here, Delaney?" Delroy recognized the lieutenant. He'd worked with her on a previous case. A good cop, by the book. Delaney hesitated, his eyes flicking between the lieutenant and Monica. "Possible disturbance," he muttered, his voice losing some of its bravado. "Just checking." Lieutenant Keogh's eyes narrowed. She glanced at Monica's uniform, at the 4 stars gleaming on her shoulders, then back at Delaney. "A disturbance?" she repeated, her voice dripping with disbelief. "At a funeral? At General Triggs' son's funeral?" Just then, a young soldier, tears streaming down her face, stepped forward. Brandy, one of Isaiah's unit members, clutched her phone, the live stream still running. "He was going to shoot her," she cried, her voice choked with emotion. "He thought she was a threat. She's a 4-star general. He was going to shoot her." The air crackled with tension. The murmur of the crowd swelled into a wave of outrage. The echo of the 21-gun salute still hung in the air, a stark counterpoint to the suffocating silence that now blanketed Arlington National Cemetery. The crisp scent of freshly turned earth mingled with the faint, metallic tang of gunpowder, clinging to the back of Monica's throat. She hadn't moved. Not since the honor guard had folded the flag. Not since they'd presented it to her with agonizing formality. Isaiah. Her Isaiah. The weight of the folded fabric felt like a physical manifestation of her grief, crushing her from the inside out. Vivian's hand tightened on her arm, a silent offering of support. Monica could feel the tremor in her sister's fingers, the shared disbelief radiating off her like heat. Monica wanted to offer comfort, a reassuring squeeze, but her own body felt locked in place, a statue carved from sorrow and simmering fury. She registered the murmurings of the crowd, the shuffling feet, the stifled sobs, but they seemed to come from a distant world, filtered through a thick, muffling fog. Her gaze remained fixed on the small, rectangular patch of disturbed earth where her son now lay. A shadow fell across the grave. Monica didn't need to look up to know who it was. The heavy, deliberate tread of combat boots on hallowed ground was a sound etched into her very being. Delroy. He stood beside her, a granite pillar of strength, his face a mask of grim determination. "CSM Hunt," she acknowledged, her voice a low, rasping whisper. She hadn't realized how dry her throat was. "General," he replied, his tone equally subdued, but laced with a protective warmth that reached her despite the numbness. He didn't touch her. He knew her too well. Touch, even the most well-intentioned, would feel like an intrusion at this moment. His presence alone was a comfort, a silent promise of unwavering support. Monica closed her eyes for a fleeting moment, the image of Isaiah's smiling face burning behind her eyelids. "He would have been so proud of you, Mom," he'd said, just days before his deployment. Pride tasted like ash in her mouth now. A jarring voice shattered the fragile peace. "Hey, ma'am, can I see some ID?" The words were laced with a dismissive tone that grated on Monica's already frayed nerves. She opened her eyes slowly, turning to face the source of the interruption. A young police officer, his face flushed, his stance aggressive, stood before her, one hand resting on his holster. Delroy shifted subtly, positioning himself slightly in front of Monica, a silent barrier against the officer's intrusive presence. Monica's mind raced. "ID? Here? At my son's funeral?" A cold knot of anger began to tighten in her chest, eclipsing the grief for a fleeting moment. "I'm General Monica Triggs," she replied, her voice steady despite the turmoil raging within her. The words, simple and declarative, held the weight of her rank, her service, her grief. She reached slowly, deliberately, into the pocket of her dress uniform for her military ID. She knew she shouldn't have to, but she also knew that any sudden movement might be misconstrued. The officer's eyes narrowed, his hand tightening on his holster. A prickle of unease ran down Monica's spine. "He doesn't recognize me, doesn't believe me." The realization landed with a sickening thud. She was being profiled. Here, at her son's funeral. "Drop to the ground," the officer barked, his voice escalating in volume and aggression. His hand left his holster, his fingers wrapping around the grip of his weapon. Time seemed to slow to a crawl. Monica could hear Vivian's sharp intake of breath, Delroy's low growl of warning. The murmuring of the crowd swelled into a wave of gasps and exclamations. He's going to draw his weapon on a 4-star general at her son's funeral. The thought, stark and unbelievable, reverberated through her mind. She felt a surge of adrenaline, the primal instinct to fight or flee, but years of military training kept her rooted to the spot. She would not be intimidated. She would not cower. Not here. Not now. Delroy moved with lightning speed, stepping directly in front of Monica, his body shielding her from the officer's line of sight. "Stand down, officer," he commanded, his voice a low, dangerous rumble. "This is General Monica Triggs, United States Army." He held up his own military ID, his gaze locked on the young officer, daring him to challenge him. The officer hesitated, his face a mixture of confusion and disbelief. He glanced from Delroy to Monica, his eyes darting nervously. The tension in the air was palpable, a taut wire stretched to its breaking point. A woman's voice, sharp and clear, cut through the silence. "Officer Delaney, what the hell are you doing?" A police lieutenant, her face etched with disapproval, pushed her way through the crowd, her hand resting on her own weapon. Monica recognized her. Lieutenant Keogh, one of the few officers who had shown genuine respect and understanding during the chaotic hours following Isaiah's death. The arrival of another officer seemed to break the spell. Officer Delaney blinked, as if waking from a trance. He lowered his weapon, his face paling slightly. The murmuring in the crowd intensified, a wave of outrage beginning to build. Monica watched the scene unfold with a detached sense of disbelief. She had faced down enemy fire, navigated complex political landscapes, and endured unimaginable loss. Yet this senseless act of prejudice, occurring in the shadow of her son's grave, felt like a violation unlike any other. The simmering rage beneath her composure threatened to boil over. She took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Justice for Isaiah. Justice for herself. That was her new mission, and she would see it through no matter the cost. The biting November wind whipped at the edges of Monica's dress uniform, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat that coiled in her chest. Delaney, the officer, a man whose name she'd already vowed to carve into the stone of her memory, stood rigid, his hand still gripping his weapon. The world, which moments before had been a blur of grief and ritual, now sharpened into a terrifying clarity. He doesn't see me. The thought, cold and alien, pierced through the numbness. For stars, a lifetime of service, the weight of command all invisible under his gaze. Delroy stepped forward, his voice a low growl that carried the weight of his own decades in uniform. "Officer, stand down. That is General Monica Triggs, United States Army." Monica registered Delroy's presence at the periphery of her vision, a familiar, comforting solidity in the swirling chaos. He was a rock, always had been. Since their days in the desert, their shared unspoken language of loyalty forged in fire and blood. "He's trying to protect me. Here at my son's funeral." The absurdity of it twisted something deep inside her. Delaney didn't move. His eyes, narrowed and fixed on Monica, held a chilling lack of recognition. Or worse, a deliberate disregard. "I don't care who she is." She reached for something in her bag. His voice, thin and reedy, grated against the solemn silence that had fallen over the gathered mourners. Monica felt a flicker of fear, a primal instinct to recoil. But beneath it, a deeper, colder rage began to build. "He's lying." The thought was a shard of ice in her veins. She had made no sudden movements, her hands clasped tightly in front of her, holding the remnants of her composure. The air crackled with tension. Whispers, like dry leaves skittering across pavement, rippled through the crowd. Someone was recording. Monica saw the glint of a phone screen, held aloft, capturing the raw, ugly scene. Brandy, she realized with a jolt, one of Isaiah's soldiers. The girl had always been quick, resourceful. Now that resourcefulness felt like a lifeline. Let the world see. The thought was a bitter comfort. "Sergeant Knowles," Delroy barked, his voice cutting through the murmuring. "Get on the radio." Code red. "Arlington National Cemetery. Officer needs assistance. Now." Sergeant Knowles, her face etched with disbelief, fumbled for her radio. Monica had seen that look before, the stunned paralysis of witnessing the unthinkable. "He's just a policeman. How dare he?" The question echoed in the hollow spaces of her grief. Delroy shifted his stance, placing himself slightly in front of Monica, a human shield against the unwavering aim of Delaney's weapon. "Officer, I am ordering you to lower your weapon. This is getting out of control." His voice was tight with controlled fury. Monica could feel the radiating heat of his anger, a protective warmth in the frigid air. He won't back down. The certainty settled in her stomach, heavy and cold. This wasn't just about her. It was about the uniform, about the disrespect, about the insidious poison of prejudice that stained the fabric of their nation. A voice, raw with emotion, broke the tense standoff. "What the hell is wrong with you?" "That's General Triggs," a veteran, his chest adorned with medals, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. Others followed, their faces a mixture of outrage and disbelief. Monica's mind raced. This couldn't escalate. Not here. Not now. Not over her. Not at her son's funeral. The weight of the moment pressed down on her. The grief for Isaiah, the raw injustice of the situation, the simmering rage. She closed her eyes for a fraction of a second, a lifetime in that brief darkness, and made a decision. A decision born not of fear, but of a weary understanding. This isn't the battle to fight. Not here, not now. She opened her eyes, her gaze locking with Delaney's. He still held his weapon trained on her, his finger tight on the trigger. The look in his eyes sent a shiver down her spine. He would shoot. The realization landed with the force of a physical blow. Slowly, deliberately, Monica lowered herself to the ground, her hands still visible, her movements measured and controlled. "I'm unarmed," she said, her voice steady despite the tremor that ran through her body. The words felt like ashes in her mouth. Humiliation burned in her throat, a bitter taste mingling with the grief. "You reach, I shoot," Delaney responded, his voice unwavering. The words hung in the air, heavy with menace. Monica remained motionless, kneeling on the cold, unforgiving ground, the wind whipping strands of hair across her face. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. This is America. The thought was a jagged shard of glass in her heart. Sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder with each passing second. Reinforcements. Finally, Monica closed her eyes, a wave of exhaustion washing over her. The real fight, was yet to come. But for now, she had to survive this. Survive the indignity, the injustice, the sheer, breathtaking absurdity of it all. For Isaiah, for herself, for the future. The weight of those burdens settled on her shoulders, heavy as a shroud. The ground beneath her knees was cold, damp, and unforgiving. And in the echoing silence of Arlington National Cemetery, General Monica Elaine Triggs, a 4-star general, knelt before a policeman's gun. The world swam back into focus, the roaring in Monica's ears receding like a tide pulling away from the shore. The cold steel pressed against her forehead had been a tangible thing, a physical manifestation of the disrespect that had been simmering beneath the surface of every interaction since Isaiah's death. The weight of grief, a crushing burden she'd carried with soldiers' discipline, threatened to crack under this new, raw pressure. He almost shot me, at my son's funeral. The thought, stark and disbelieving, echoed in the hollow chambers of her heart. Delaney, his face contorted in a grimace of what Monica could only interpret as self-righteous fury, still held her in his sights. The trembling in her hands, though slight, was perceptible. Control, Monica. Control. Years of command, of facing down enemy fire, of burying the deepest sorrows beneath an unflinching exterior, had ingrained in her a steel will. It was this will that kept her rooted to the spot, her gaze locked on Delaney's. A sharp, authoritative voice cut through the tense tableau. Delaney, holster your weapon now. Lieutenant Keogh, her face a mask of controlled fury, advanced on Delaney. Her hand hovered near her own weapon, her stance conveying a readiness to act. A flicker of something akin to fear, no, not fear, but a startled awareness crossed Delaney's face. It was the look of a man suddenly realizing he'd overstepped, not out of remorse, but out of a belated understanding of the consequences. Monica's mind raced. Keogh was a good officer, sharp and by the book. She had met her briefly at a community event a few months prior. Thank God she's here. This woman, Delaney began, but Keogh cut him off. I said holster your weapon, Officer Delaney. The command, amplified by the acoustics of the cemetery, hung heavy in the air. Several other officers, alerted by the commotion, began to converge on the scene. Their expressions ranged from shock to disbelief to barely concealed anger. Delaney hesitated, his grip tightening on his gun. For a heart-stopping moment, Monica thought he might defy the order. He wouldn't dare. Would he? The thought sent a chill down her spine, colder than the November air. With a swift, decisive movement, Lieutenant Keogh closed the distance between herself and Delaney. Her hand lashed out, striking his wrist with a force that made Monica wince. The gun clattered to the ground. You're done, Keogh stated, her voice low and dangerous. Two officers moved in, restraining Delaney, who now seemed to have deflated, his bluster replaced by a sullen silence. The gun lay on the cold ground, a stark reminder of what could have been. Monica could feel the tension slowly draining from her body, replaced by a wave of exhaustion so profound it threatened to buckle her knees. Delroy, his face etched with worry, reached her side. Monica, are you all right? His voice, rough with concern, was a lifeline in the swirling chaos. Vivian, her face pale and tear-streaked, gripped Monica's hand. The pressure of her fingers was a silent reassurance. Monica nodded, the word caught in her throat. She could feel the stares of the assembled mourners, the weight of their collective shock and disbelief pressing down on her. Not here. Not like this. Isaiah deserved better. He deserved a dignified farewell, not this spectacle of prejudice and violence. Sergeant Knowles, her eyes wide with horror, appeared beside Monica. General, I am so sorry. I'll escort you back to your car. Her voice trembled slightly. Monica, gathering her shattered composure, managed a small nod. She allowed Knowles and Delroy to guide her away from the scene, the whispers and murmurs of the crowd fading into a dull hum. As they walked, Monica's mind replayed the events of the last few minutes, each detail etched into her memory with agonizing clarity. The casual disregard for her rank, the implicit threat in Delaney's eyes, the cold steel against her skin. It was a violation not just of her person, but of everything she represented. Her uniform, her rank, her service, none of it mattered to him. She was just another black woman, a potential threat to be neutralized. The realization settled deep within her, a cold, hard knot of anger. This wasn't just about her. This was about Isaiah, about all the black men and women who had faced similar prejudice, about the systemic injustices that had plagued her community for generations. This ends now. The thought, fierce and resolute, solidified within her. She would not let this go. She would fight for justice, for accountability, for change. This wasn't just a personal battle. It was a war against a system that had failed her son, and failed countless others. As she reached her car, Monica paused, taking a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. The world seemed to tilt on its axis, the weight of grief and anger threatening to consume her. But within the storm of emotions, a spark of resolve ignited. She would not break. She would not be silenced. She would use her voice, her position, her influence to ensure that what happened to her today would never happen again. The fight had just begun. The news of the incident spread like wildfire, fueled by Brandy's live stream. Within hours, the hashtag Justice for Monica Triggs was trending worldwide. The video, raw and unedited, captured the shock and outrage of the moment. The public outcry was immediate and deafening. Protests erupted across the country, demanding Delaney's arrest and conviction. The Arlington Police Department, facing intense scrutiny, launched an internal investigation. Delaney was swiftly fired and charged with aggravated assault and several other offenses. The trial was a media circus, every detail dissected and debated in the public forum. Monica, despite her grief and the emotional toll of reliving the trauma, testified with unwavering strength and composure. Her testimony, powerful and poignant, resonated with millions. She spoke not only of her own experience but of the larger issue of racial profiling and systemic bias within law enforcement. The jury deliberated for less than a day. The verdict, guilty on all counts. In the courtroom, a collective gasp of relief mingled with tears of joy and anger. Outside, the cheers of the protesters echoed through the streets. As Monica addressed the press after the verdict, her voice resonated with the weight of history and the hope for a better future. "This verdict is not just a victory for me," she stated, her gaze steady and unwavering. "It is a victory for all those who have been unjustly targeted, profiled, and marginalized because of the color of their skin. It is a reminder that we must continue to fight for justice, for equality, and for a world where every life is valued and respected." Her words, echoing the sentiment of a nation grappling with its own demons, marked a turning point. The fight for justice was far from over, but for now, a small measure of accountability had been achieved. The echoes of Isaiah's name, once whispered in grief, now resonated with the promise of change. The canvas tent shuddered in the biting November wind, offering a flimsy sanctuary against the raw grief that permeated Arlington National Cemetery. Monica sat on a folding chair, the crisp uniform of a four-star general seeming incongruous with the profound weariness that clung to her like a shroud. Her hands, usually so steady, trembled in her lap. The world swam in a blurry haze, the rhythmic thud of her own heartbeat a deafening counterpoint to the hushed whispers just outside the tent flap. "My son. My Isaiah." The thought clawed at her throat, a raw, gaping wound that refused to close. Just moments ago, she had stood at the precipice of her own grave, the cold steel of a gun aimed at her chest. Not on a battlefield, not in a war zone, but here, at the final resting place of her only child. The absurdity of it pressed down, suffocating her. The muted murmur of voices grew louder, punctuated by the sharp, insistent tone of Sergeant Knowles. Monica recognized the strained cadence, the controlled fury of a loyal soldier defending her commander. She shouldn't have to do this. Not today. A wave of exhaustion washed over her, a bone-deep weariness that transcended physical fatigue. It was the weight of a lifetime spent navigating a world that saw her skin before it saw her stars. "There's no excuse for this, officer." Sergeant Knowles' voice cut through the canvas, edged with steel. "You drew your weapon on a 4-star general. At her son's funeral." A dismissive snort echoed from outside. "Officer Delaney." The name tasted like ash in Monica's mouth. "He saw my grief as a threat, my blackness as a weapon." She closed her eyes, willing the image of his sneering face to dissipate. The casual indifference in his eyes had chilled her more than the gun itself. She was behaving erratically. Delaney's voice, laced with a dismissive arrogance, grated on Monica's nerves. Reached for her bag. "I felt threatened." Threatened? The word reverberated in Monica's mind, a cruel mockery of the true threat that had loomed over her just moments ago. The threat of losing her son. The threat of a system that devalued her life, her service, her very existence. Sergeant Knowles' voice rose again, a fierce torrent of righteous anger. Erratically, General Triggs was grieving. She was burying her son. "You had no right." "I followed protocol," Delaney interrupted, his tone smug. "I assessed the situation, and I acted accordingly." Monica's breath hitched. Protocol. The word dripped with hypocrisy. What protocol dictated that a grieving mother, a decorated general, should be treated like a common criminal? What protocol justified the terror that had gripped her heart? The cold certainty that she was about to die. A hand rested gently on her shoulder. Vivian. Her sister's presence radiated a quiet strength, a silent promise of support. Monica felt a flicker of warmth in the icy wasteland of her grief. She shouldn't have to see this. The thought pierced through the fog of her despair. Her sister, her rock, witnessing this raw, ugly display of prejudice. The argument outside continued, a cacophony of accusations and denials. But the words no longer registered. Monica's mind was a whirlwind of fragmented memories. Isaiah's infectious laughter, his bright, eager eyes, the weight of his hand in hers. He should be here. He should be alive. Suddenly, a different voice cut through the din. "Lieutenant Keogh. Officer Delaney, you are relieved of duty. Effective immediately." There was a firmness in her voice, an unwavering authority that silenced the escalating argument. A small measure of justice, perhaps, but it couldn't bring back her son. The tent flap opened, and CSM Hunt stepped inside, his face etched with concern. He knelt beside Monica, his eyes searching hers. "Are you all right, Monica?" She wanted to say yes, to reassure him, to reassure herself. But the words caught in her throat. "All right? How can I be all right?" The question echoed silently in the vast emptiness within her. Vivian squeezed her shoulder. "He didn't break you, Monica." The words, whispered so softly, were a lifeline. A spark of defiance ignited within Monica's numb heart. "No, he didn't break me." She straightened in her chair, her gaze hardening. "He saw my skin before he saw my stars," she whispered, her voice hoarse but steady. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. The dam of her composure finally broke, releasing a torrent of pain and anger. He saw a threat where there was only grief. He saw a criminal where there was only a mother burying her son. Her voice rose, gaining strength with each word. "He didn't see me. He saw a stereotype, a prejudice, a fear." CSM Hunt's hand tightened on hers, a silent affirmation of her words. He knew. He understood the invisible burden she carried, the constant weight of expectations and judgments. She looked at Vivian, at Hunt, at Sergeant Knowles, standing just inside the tent, her face pale but resolute. "They see me." The realization warmed her, a small ember of hope in the desolate landscape of her grief. "My son served this country. He died for this country. And this—" She gestured towards the outside, towards the world that had nearly taken her life as well, This is the respect he gets? This is the honor he's afforded. Her voice cracked, but she pushed on, fueled by a righteous fury that burned hotter than grief. This isn't just about me. This is about every black mother, every black son, every black person who has ever been judged, condemned, and dehumanized because of the color of their skin. The silence in the tent was thick, heavy with the weight of her words. Monica closed her eyes, drawing a deep, shaky breath. The fight wasn't over. It had just begun. She would honor Isaiah's memory. She would demand justice. She would not be silenced. The silence in Vivian's home was a thick, suffocating blanket. Monica sat on the edge of the guest bed, the crisp, starched fabric of her uniform a stark contrast to the swirling chaos within her. Her son's funeral, a day meant for mourning and remembrance, had transformed into a grotesque spectacle of prejudice and near violence. The image of Officer Delaney's hand hovering over his holster, his eyes narrowed on her, a 4-star general, replayed in her mind, a chilling loop of disbelief and burgeoning fury. She pressed her fingers against her temples, the throbbing a dull counterpoint to the sharp ache in her chest. Grief for Isaiah, raw and consuming, warred with the cold, hard anger that threatened to shatter her composure. They almost shot me, at my son's funeral. The thought was absurd, surreal, yet undeniably real. Vivian, ever the anchor in Monica's storms, sat beside her, a hand resting gently on her arm. Her presence was a silent offering of comfort, a shared space of grief and understanding. Monica could feel her sister's concern radiating outwards, a tangible warmth in the frigid air of the room. "He's gone, Monica," Vivian whispered, her voice thick with unshed tears. "Isaiah's gone." The words, though spoken countless times in the last few days, still struck Monica with the force of a physical blow. She closed her eyes, the image of Isaiah's smiling face flickering behind her eyelids. Her brilliant, kind Isaiah, reduced to a cold, silent body in the ground. And they almost shot his mother. The thought clawed at her throat, choking her. The first ripples of the incident spread through the hushed whispers of the attendees. Then, Brandy's livestream, initially intended as a tribute to Isaiah, became a viral wildfire. The shaky footage, capturing the tense standoff between Monica and Officer Delaney, Brandy's voice trembling with outrage. "This is what we deal with, they still look at you like a threat," resonated with a raw, visceral power. The words, echoing the unspoken fears and experiences of countless others, ignited a blaze of public outrage. Within hours, the video had been shared millions of times, sparking a national conversation about racial profiling, police brutality, and the deep-seated systemic biases that permeated the very fabric of society. Monica watched the unfolding events from a distance, her grief-stricken mind struggling to comprehend the scale of the reaction. The news channels blared with commentary, experts dissected the incident frame by frame, and social media platforms erupted with a cacophony of voices, demanding justice, accountability, and change. Delroy, her rock, her confidant, stood by her side, his presence a silent bulwark against the encroaching storm. He knew her better than anyone, understood the layers of control she meticulously maintained, the iron will that masked the vulnerability beneath. "Let it out, Monica," he murmured, his voice low and steady. "Don't bottle it up." But Monica couldn't. The grief, the anger, the sheer exhaustion were a tangled knot within her, a Gordian knot she lacked the strength to unravel. Instead, she focused on the task at hand, ensuring that Officer Delaney was held accountable for his actions. The investigations began swiftly, fueled by the relentless pressure of public scrutiny. The Arlington Police Department, scrambling to contain the damage, launched an internal inquiry. The mayor issued a carefully worded statement expressing concern and promising a thorough investigation. The governor, sensing the political ramifications, called for calm and unity. But the fire, once ignited, refused to be extinguished. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months. The media frenzy intensified, with every detail of Monica's life, her career, Her son's death dissected and analyzed under the harsh glare of the public eye. She found herself thrust into the unwilling role of a symbol, a representative of a struggle she had fought her entire life. The pressure was immense, suffocating. She retreated further. Into herself, her silence a shield against the relentless barrage of questions. The intrusive cameras, the constant scrutiny. The world outside her sister's home became a blur of noise and movement, a distant echo of the storm raging within. The trial was a media circus. Officer Delaney, stripped of his badge and uniform, sat hunched in the defendant's chair, his face a mask of sullen defiance. The prosecution presented a meticulously constructed case, detailing the events leading up to the near shooting, highlighting Delaney's history of aggressive behavior and racial profiling. The defense argued that Delaney had acted in accordance with his training, that he had perceived a threat and responded accordingly. Monica, called to the stand, testified with a quiet dignity that belied the turmoil within. Her words, measured and precise, cut through the courtroom's tense atmosphere, painting a vivid picture of the fear and humiliation she had endured. She spoke not only for herself but for all those who had faced similar injustices, their voices silenced by fear and systemic oppression. The verdict came swiftly, guilty. A collective gasp rippled through the courtroom, followed by a hushed silence. Monica felt a flicker of something akin to relief, a small victory in a war that was far from over. Outside, the crowd erupted in cheers, their voices a chorus of triumph and vindication. Later, standing before a sea of faces, Monica delivered a powerful statement, her voice resonating with the weight of her experience. She spoke of the need for systemic change, for accountability within law enforcement, for a society where a black woman, a four-star general, could mourn her son without fear of being shot. Her words, carried on the wings of the media, echoed across the nation, a call to action, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, and a promise of a future where justice and equality prevailed. The fight, she knew, was far from over. But for now, in this moment, she allowed herself a small measure of peace, a quiet space to grieve for her son, and a flicker of hope for a better tomorrow. The stale air of courtroom 6B hung heavy, thick with the ghosts of 1,000 judgments. 6 months. 6 months since the crisp autumn air had carried the scent of lilies and the echo of a 21-gun salute, now replaced by the sterile hum of fluorescent lights and the hushed whispers of anticipation. Monica sat ramrod straight, her dress uniform a stark contrast to the somber navy suit she'd worn that day. The weight of the medals on her chest felt heavier, each one a reminder of a life dedicated to service, a life now irrevocably marked by a single, senseless act. Her gaze, usually sharp and assessing, was fixed on a point just beyond the defense table, as though focusing on something only she could see. Accountability. The word reverberated in the silent chambers of her mind. It wasn't about vengeance, not about the raw, clawing grief that still tore at her insides. It was about something larger, something that transcended her personal pain. It was about ensuring that no other mother, no other soldier, would have to endure the indignity, the sheer terror of that day. Delaney sat across the aisle, his face a mask of studied indifference. His lawyer, a slick man in a pinstriped suit, was weaving a tapestry of plausible deniability. A tragic misunderstanding, a high-stress situation the officer feared for his safety. The words droned on, each syllable grating against Monica's raw nerves. She could almost feel the phantom pressure of the gun against her temple, the cold, metallic glint of it under the weak November sun. He saw my uniform. He saw my stars. The thought, a cold, hard knot in her stomach, refused to unravel. How could a man sworn to uphold the law, to protect and serve, so readily disregard everything her uniform represented? It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a deliberate act of disrespect, a blatant display of prejudice rooted in something far deeper than fear. The prosecution, a young woman with a steely gaze and a voice that resonated with conviction, systematically dismantled the defense's narrative. The video, grainy but undeniable, played on the large screen, a silent indictment. Brandy's shaky hand, the rising panic in her voice as she narrated the events, the stark contrast between Delaney's aggressive posture and Monica's stunned stillness. It was all there, laid bare for the jury to see. Monica watched impassively as witness after witness took the stand. CSM Hunt, his voice thick with barely suppressed fury, recounted the events with the precision of a seasoned soldier. Vivian, her voice trembling with residual fear, described the sheer terror that had gripped her as she watched her sister face down the barrel of a gun. Even Lieutenant Keogh, her face etched with a mixture of shame and resolve, testified to Delaney's history of aggressive behavior, a pattern of incidents that had been swept under the rug, ignored until they culminated in this. The internal affairs records, unearthed with painstaking effort, painted a damning picture. A pattern of racial profiling, of excessive force, of a man whose badge had become a shield against accountability. Monica closed her eyes for a moment, the courtroom fading into the background as the memory of Isaiah's smile, bright and full of life, flashed before her. "This is for you, son." The thought, a whisper of steel in the storm of her grief, steadied her. When her name was called, she rose, every movement precise and controlled, her grief a silent current beneath the surface of her composure. She took the oath, her voice clear and unwavering, and then she turned to face the jury. "I didn't come here for revenge," she began, her voice resonating with a quiet power that silenced the room. "I came here for accountability." She spoke of her son, of his dedication to his country, of the values he had embodied. She spoke of the oath she had taken, the oath to defend the Constitution, the oath that Delaney had so callously disregarded. She spoke of the fear, the humiliation, the raw, visceral anger she had felt, not just for herself, but for every person who had ever been judged by the color of their skin, for every life unjustly taken, for every dream deferred by the weight of systemic prejudice. Her words, measured and deliberate, carried the weight of her experience, the weight of her grief, the weight of a system crying out for change. She didn't raise her voice, didn't plead or cajole. She simply spoke the truth, her words hanging in the air like a challenge, a demand for justice not just for herself, but for all. The silence in the courtroom after she finished was almost palpable. It stretched, taut and heavy, until the judge's gavel broke the spell, a sharp crack that echoed the breaking point of something long overdue. The jury's deliberation was short, their verdict unanimous. Guilty. The word, a single syllable of condemnation, reverberated through the room, a small victory in a larger war. Monica sat motionless, her face betraying no emotion. The relief she felt was a muted echo beneath the weight of her grief, a faint flicker of hope in the vast darkness of her loss. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But for now, for this moment, justice had been served. And somewhere, in the quiet spaces between grief and anger, Isaiah's memory lived on. The air crackled with a strange energy, a mixture of relief and simmering anger. The courthouse steps, usually cold and impersonal, now throbbed with the weight of the verdict. A sea of faces, a mosaic of emotions, stretched before Monica. The click-clack of cameras, the whirring of drones, the hushed murmurs, it all felt distant, muffled, as though separated by a thick pane of glass. Inside, a storm raged. Officer Delaney had been found guilty. Guilty, but not for attempted murder, as Monica had so desperately hoped. Manslaughter. Voluntary manslaughter. The legal jargon echoed in her mind, hollow and insufficient. It felt like a compromise, a bargain struck at the expense of her son's memory. She straightened her uniform, the crisp fabric a stark contrast to the turmoil within. Delroy stood beside her, a silent sentinel, his hand resting reassuringly on her arm. The pressure, firm yet gentle, grounded her. He knew her better than anyone, knew the tempestuous currents swirling beneath her composed exterior. Justice, he'd murmured after the verdict, his voice heavy with unspoken words. A flawed justice, but justice nonetheless. Monica had simply nodded, unable to articulate the bitter taste in her mouth. Vivian squeezed her hand, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "You did it, Monica," she whispered, her voice choked with emotion. You did it for Isaiah. Monica met her sister's gaze, a flicker of something akin to pain crossing her face. Did she do it for Isaiah? Or was it something more? This fight had transcended her personal grief, morphing into something larger, something that resonated with the collective pain of a community, a nation. She inhaled deeply, the crisp autumn air stinging her nostrils. She could smell the rain, feel the subtle shift in the wind, a precursor to the approaching storm. The same storm that had raged within her for months, threatening to consume her. Now, standing on these steps, facing a nation watching, she knew she had a choice. She could succumb to the bitterness, the rage, the all-consuming desire for retribution. Or she could rise above it, use this moment to speak, to ignite a spark, to demand more than just a guilty verdict. She adjusted the microphone, the cold metal a shock against her skin. The sudden silence, thick and expectant, pressed against her. 1,000 eyes bored into her, waiting for her to speak, to articulate the emotions swirling within them. For months ago, she began, her voice surprisingly steady, I stood at my son's graveside, a mother burying her child. A pain so profound, so visceral, it threatened to shatter me. She paused, her gaze sweeping across the crowd. She saw faces etched with sympathy, with anger, with a shared understanding of loss. She saw the faces of young black men, their eyes mirroring her own weariness, their postures reflecting a lifetime of navigating a system rigged against them. That day, I wasn't just a grieving mother. I was a 4-star general in the United States Army. A uniform, a rank, a lifetime of service, none of it mattered. In the eyes of Officer Delaney, I was just another black woman, a threat to be neutralized. The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken accusations. Her internal monologue raged. Was this the right approach? Would this alienate some, fuel the flames of division? But another, stronger voice urged her on. This isn't about you, Monica. It's about them. It's about Isaiah. The bullet that almost took my life that day, she continued, her voice gaining strength, was aimed at something larger than me. It was aimed at every black person who has ever been judged by the color of their skin, every person who has been denied the basic human right to be seen, to be heard, to be treated with dignity and respect. She saw Sergeant Knowles standing near the back, her face a mask of grim determination. Brandy, the young soldier who had live-streamed the incident, stood beside her, her phone held aloft, capturing Monica's every word. The video had gone viral, sparking outrage, igniting protests across the country. It had become a symbol, a rallying cry for change. Monica knew that this moment, this speech would be scrutinized, dissected, analyzed. She knew it would become another piece of the puzzle, another chapter in the ongoing narrative of racial injustice. And she was determined to make it count. This verdict, she declared, her voice ringing with conviction, is a step in the right direction, but it is not enough. It will never be enough. Because true justice is not just about punishing individuals. It's about dismantling the systems that allow such injustices to occur in the first place. A ripple of agreement spread through the crowd, a collective murmur of assent. She felt a surge of adrenaline, a renewed sense of purpose. This was it. This was the moment. We need to reform our police departments, invest in our communities, and address the root causes of racial inequality. We need to have honest conversations about race, about privilege, about the biases that permeate our society. Her own internal biases, her own struggles with prejudice, she acknowledged them, silently, within the depths of her own being. This fight wasn't just about external change. It was about internal transformation as well. This isn't just my story, she concluded, her voice resonating with a quiet power. This is America's mirror, and it's time we looked into it, honestly and unflinchingly, and asked ourselves, what kind of reflection do we want to see? A hush fell over the crowd, a silence pregnant with meaning. Then, a single voice cried out, "Justice for Isaiah," and another, until the chant echoed through the square. A chorus of voices demanding change, demanding accountability, demanding a better future. Monica stood there, bathed in the fading sunlight, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. She had spoken her truth. Now it was up to the rest of them to listen. The approaching storm finally broke, the first drops of rain splattering against the pavement. Felt like a cleansing, a baptism, the beginning of something new. The biting wind whipped at Monica's dress uniform, the 4 stars on her shoulder boards cold against her skin. Arlington National Cemetery stretched before her, a silent city of white headstones under a perpetually gray sky. It had been gray that day too, the day they laid him to rest, the day the world fractured. The gray mirrored the hollowness in her chest, a void that no amount of time could fill. Isaiah, her boy. She knelt before his grave, the polished granite reflecting the overcast sky like a dark, still pool. Her gloved hand traced the inscription of his name, each letter a fresh pang of grief. Isaiah Elijah Triggs. A life cut short, a future stolen. Her breath hitched in her throat, the familiar ache tightening its grip. Control, Monica. You must maintain control. She had learned to live with this pain, to carry it like a shield, a constant reminder of the fight she had to wage. The trial had been a whirlwind. Cameras flashing, reporters shouting, the nation watching. Officer Delaney, his face a mask of indifference, pleading not guilty. Not guilty. The words echoed in her mind, a grotesque mockery of justice. The image of him, hand hovering over his holster, the glint of metal in the afternoon sun, seared itself into her memory. If Lieutenant Keogh hadn't reacted so swiftly, Monica shuddered, the thought too unbearable to complete. Vivian had been there, her sister's hand gripping hers, a lifeline in the storm. Delroy, his face grim, a silent sentinel at her side. He understood. He had known Isaiah since he was a boy, his godfather, his mentor, another casualty of this senseless war that wasn't fought on foreign soil. The public outcry had been immediate, fierce. Brandy's livestream had gone viral, igniting a firestorm of outrage. The world had seen. The world had finally seen what she had known for so long, the insidious poison of prejudice that permeated the very fabric of society. A 4-star general in uniform at her son's funeral, perceived as a threat. The absurdity of it clawed at her, a bitter taste in her mouth. She had spent her life serving her country, rising through the ranks, breaking barriers, only to be reduced to the color of her skin in the eyes of a man who swore to protect and serve. The trial had been grueling, a public dissection of her grief. The defense attorney's questions, sharp and pointed, attempting to paint her as unstable, aggressive, a threat to the officer. Did you make any sudden movements, General? Did you raise your voice? Were you armed? Each question felt like a violation, a stripping away of her dignity. But she had held firm, her voice steady, her gaze unwavering. She had testified not just for Isaiah, but for all the mothers who had lost their sons, for all the black and brown bodies unjustly targeted, for all the silenced voices crying out for justice. She had spoken truth to power, even as power tried to silence her. The conviction had brought a fleeting sense of relief, a small victory in a much larger war. Officer Delaney had been found guilty of aggravated assault and misconduct in office. The sentence, though inadequate in her eyes, was a start. But the true battle, she knew, was far from over. The systemic racism that had allowed this to happen, the ingrained biases that permeated every level of society, these were the true enemies. The wind picked up, swirling fallen leaves around her feet. She closed her eyes, inhaling the crisp autumn air, the scent of damp earth and decaying leaves, the familiar smells of Arlington, a place of honor and sorrow, a place where heroes rested, and where her heart lay buried. She thought of Isaiah's smile, his infectious laughter, the way he used to call her Mama General. A tear escaped, tracing a cold path down her cheek. He would have been so proud of you, Monica. Delroy's words from after the verdict resonated in her mind. He had been her rock throughout the ordeal, his steady presence a source of strength. Vivian, too, her sister's unwavering support a balm to her wounded spirit. She opened her eyes, gazing at the endless rows of headstones, each one a story of sacrifice, of loss, of love. The gray sky seemed less oppressive now, the clouds parting slightly to reveal a sliver of blue, a flicker of hope in the vast expanse of grief. She placed a single white rose on Isaiah's grave, a symbol of purity, of innocence, of a life tragically cut short. She straightened, her shoulders back, her chin held high. The grief was still there, a constant companion, but it no longer consumed her. It had been transformed into something else, something stronger, something fiercer, a resolve to fight, to speak, to demand change. She had found a new purpose in her pain, a new mission in her grief. She would honor Isaiah's memory by fighting for a world where no mother had to endure what she had endured, a world where the color of one's skin didn't determine their fate. She took one last look at her son's grave, the granite gleaming under the pale sunlight. Her voice, barely a whisper, carried on the wind. I did what I had to do. And with that, she turned and walked away, the weight of her grief lifted, replaced by the steel of her resolve. The fight was far from over, but she was ready. She would fight for Isaiah. She would fight for justice. She would fight for a better world.